people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. News broke yesterday. McCaskill versus Ryan. The WBO rejects an appeal for an immediate rematch. Both boxers have been ordered to make mandatory title defenses, which puts a potential rematch between them at least 2 fights away from now, at least 2. 2 sanctioning bodies have provided a roadblock to a Jessica McCaskill versus Sandy Ryan rematch. Rulings from the WBC and WBO have called for the pair of welterweight titleists to next enter mandatory title defenses in lieu of a second unification match. Confirmation was provided in the WBO's ruling on a protest filed by Matchroom Boxing executive matchmaker Tom Dallas, who filed an appeal with the WBA, WBC, and WBO regarding the questionable split decision draw in their September 24th championship clash in Orlando, Florida. This committee strongly believes that the claims provided by Matchroom Boxing do not merit an immediate return fight. That essentially means that in their very next outings, Sandy will be fighting a mandatory, and Jessica will be fighting a mandatory. What seemed like a decisive points win for Sandy Ryan in what was her fight with Jessica McCaskill has now turned into a long, drug-out process. WBO Championships Committee Chairman Luis Batista Salas noted in a ruling obtained by BoxingScene.com, even under the assumption that a rematch was warranted, which this committee strongly rejects, the WBO lacks jurisdiction to order Sandy Ryan versus Jessica McCaskill. An important detail, that even if the WBO were on board to see a second fight happen, and they ordered one, they have no power over Jessica. They can't make Jessica do it because Jessica's not WBO champion. Sandy is. The only ones who would have any power, any say-so in that situation would be the WBC and WBA. Jessica McCaskill does hold alphabet titles with them. The WBO took exception to the claim that the outcome was controversial despite the majority of viewers and media members who had Ryan handily winning the fight. Boxing Scene scored about 97-93 in favor of Ryan. Additionally, the sanctioning body noted the glaring conflict of interest in a report provided by the WBA, whose independent panel had Ryan winning every single round upon review of the fight. The matter was headed by Luis Pabon, whose status as an active referee should have disqualified him from the process. Nevertheless, the WBO did not deem the outcome as egregious as some others to call for an immediate rematch, nor does it carry the jurisdiction since it was a voluntary title fight. McCaskill, a former undisputed champion who was stripped of her WBO and IBF titles, still holds both the WBA and WBC titles, and a mandate would be more effective if it were coming from them, if it were coming from the WBA and the WBC. Ryan lodged the first successful defense of the WBO title she claimed earlier this year. WBC President Mauricio Suleiman noted that McCaskill was already on the hook to face a mandatory challenger in Ivana Habazin. When the sanctioning body approved her request to face Ryan, the condition was that the winner, or McCaskill, in the event of a draw or no contest, would have to face Habazin afterwards. A modified ruling by the WBC now calls for the winner of McCaskill versus Habazin to next face Ryan. I remember ahead of the Sandy Ryan fight, reports indicated that Jessica McCaskill entered into a multi-fight deal with Matchroom. And I'm going to assume that a Habazin fight would now be a part of that deal and doing that fight. One can definitely argue that Jessica McCaskill is quite fortunate in this situation in more ways than one, because to a lot of people, she lost the Sandy Ryan fight and she was gifted a draw, and now she's going to fight Ivana Habazin. Ivana, a former champion who's quite beatable, by the way.
Jessica McCaskill is fortunate. She's fortunate to still have those 2 alphabet titles, and she's fortunate that her mandatory is someone as beatable as Ivana Habazin.
It's Jessica McCaskill's mandatory. We'll see who Sandy Ryan has to fight, who her mandatory is. It's just a bit jarring that it would seem sensible and sensical to order the second fight between them. The sanctioning bodies want to give them a hard time. Sandy's not happy about this. I don't expect her to be. It would have actually been up to the WBC and the WBA, the alphabet organizations that Jessica holds titles with. It would have actually been more on them than the WBO to see a second fight happen, to order one.
The WBO has no power over Jessica, no say-so, no jurisdiction.
This essentially pushes a rematch between Sandy and Jessica. At least two fights from now. The saving grace for Sandy, I think, is that it's not like Jessica has a whole lot of options for a big purse, a big payday, outside of a unification match with her.
Which would give Jessica an incentive to revisit a second fight with Sandy. The purse, the payday. She ain't gonna make but so much fighting Ivana.
So we may yet see a second fight between them in the second or third quarter of next year. Jessica's best bet to get a decent-sized purse, decent-sized fight, would be a Sandy Ryan rematch.
Money is the great motivator, and that might motivate her to fight Sandy for a second time.
In men's super bantamweight news, I'm sure most of you heard, late yesterday, it was officially announced Naoya Inoue versus Marlon Tapales is official for the day after Christmas, Boxing Day, in Tokyo, and it will be broadcasted here in America on ESPN+.
I don't know about you guys, but if Inoue takes care of business in December, he will certainly be Ring IQ's Fighter of the Year and #1 pound-for-pound fighter overall. That's right, he will overtake Terence Crawford.
Inoue will return to the arena where he claimed undisputed championship status with the hope of repeating history. The 4-division champion is set for his full junior featherweight unification bout versus the Philippines' Marlon Tapales. Their lineal WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO championship is set for December 26, Boxing Day, at the Ariake Arena in Tokyo. ESPN Plus will air the bout live in the early post-Christmas hours, as Inoue aims to become the sport's second male boxer to claim undisputed status in 2 divisions. The first was Terence Crawford earlier this year, the Spence fight.
The sensational Naoya Inoue astounds with every performance. We are witnessing an all-time great fighter in the prime of his career. He has a very difficult task ahead of him on December 26th against a tough, powerful Filipino champion in Marlon Tapales. But I am confident the monster will pass this test with flying colors.
In the 5 years, 5 or so, that I've been covering the career of Naoya Inoue, because I didn't just now find out about him like many Americans. I've been covering his fights for about 5 years now, maybe a little longer, and he's a fighter who doesn't give you much to complain about. The fights themselves, the ones that need to happen, they happen in a timely fashion. The performances are entertaining performances. The victories are decisive victories. He just doesn't give you much to complain about, and yet there are still those out there.
I saw Devin Haney shading him on the Ariel Helwani show. I saw that. That was recent. That was this week.
I have nothing against anyway.
But you could see the skill, though, right? I mean,
You cannot take. Like I said, I respect his game. I can't. I cannot take that away from him. I respect his powers. He's powerful, but I just don't know the guys that he's fighting. I don't know them. He looked great against Fulton. He looks great against Schoolboy Steph. Beautiful performance. That was like the first real one that I could say. Donaire was on the back. Donaire was on the back end of his career.
Sure. He did smoke him though. What was that, like 2 rounds or something?
What, the second fight?
Yeah, the second fight. Yeah, the first one was close.
First fight, he went to war with him.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I take issue with Devin's observations about Inoue. I have some critiques of my own. Devin says that he just isn't familiar with the fighters that he's fighting, as if that's any measure for how good they are or how good they aren't, where he may not be familiar with an Emmanuel Rodriguez, per se, or a Paul Butler. Don't sell me a dream that George Kambosos is Julio Iglesias, because he isn't. And notoriety in and of itself isn't what we're measuring here. We're measuring skill. The skill it takes to beat that many champions across that many weight classes and do it decisively. Where he says that Inoue went life or death with Nonito Donaire. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he did in the first fight. It was a much harder fight for Inoue than people expected it to be, and maybe he did go life or death with that guy. But after the fight, nobody was screaming robbery. Nobody was screaming that Nonito won the fight.
The way they were after Devin fought Vasyl Lomachenko. Nobody was booing Naoya Inoue after the Donaire fight, but Devin was getting booed after the Lomachenko fight. When you nitpick somebody the way he's nitpicking Inoue, you leave yourself open for those same critiques, those same criticisms.
He doesn't have to have hair on his tongue for me, you, or anybody else. He can say what he thinks. He can say exactly what he thinks and exactly what he means. But then again, so can I, and so can we. And when I see Devin saying these things, that he's just not familiar with the fighters that Inoue is fighting, that's not an indictment on Inoue, and that's not an indictment on them. Your own ignorance, what you do or don't know, is between you and God. That doesn't lessen their abilities or Inoue's.
Or his accomplishments. You will have often heard me say that many Americans, people here in the West, they don't often watch the guys at the lighter weights anyway, so I don't expect Devin or most Americans to know who these guys are.
I chalk it up to American arrogance. That's how I look at it. It's American arrogance to slight Naoya Inoue and who he's fighting based on what you don't know. All that means is that you're in no position to talk because you haven't done the legwork. You haven't done the research. If you're not familiar with who he fought, then how could you say anything good or bad about them? You don't know what you're talking about. You just admitted that.
The barometer for a fighter's skill isn't always how popular they are. I mean, Guillermo Rigondeaux was once the most skilled guy at 122, but he was never all that popular. Erslandy Lara, very skilled guy at 154, but he was never popular either.
And when you're talking about weight classes that most Americans don't watch because, well, most of the time, Americans don't have a horse in those races. You know, at those lower weights, it's primarily Asians and Mexicans and Latin Americans you see in those ranked standings, not Americans. When you're talking about divisions Americans don't watch anyway, I expect they're going to be blasé about it. American arrogance.
Here's reality. Naoya Inoue has already made history for his country and the Asian boxing scene overall. He's set to make history again, whether you like it or not, or aware of it or not.
He's actually a bigger draw in his country, by and large, than you are in yours. So he doesn't need your approval or your blessings. He doesn't actually need you specifically, you here in the United States, to know who he's fighting or approve of it, because he's already wildly successful without you, without your approval.
Recently with Shakur Stevenson, there was a potential fight, right? You gave him an offer, but he was only going to get 25%.
Yeah, not only 25%. He was going to get 25%.
And still, 25% of a lot of money.
No, and it was the 25% was going to be more than he ever made,
right,
in his career. And even if, just say, what if the 25% was, less? It wasn't, but let's just say that it was less. He would still get a shot at all the belts to be the man, and I think that would have been more than enough, with just that. If he felt like I was, a easy fight like he said I was, then it would be a no-brainer to take it.
Right. Because business-wise, so if you were in his position, you would have been like, that's a good move.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I was in his position before.
Right. So, okay, there we go.
I was in his position before when I went to Australia, and I took 22% to become undisputed. And not once, but twice, I went back to fight twice. That was in my deal. I couldn't just go out there and fight one time and win the belts and then bring it back home. I had to fight him twice. I had to sign to another promoter, his promoter, to fight him. And go over there to Australia and fight in his home turf. But I knew that I trusted my talent, trusted my skills. I knew I could beat him, and so that's why I put it all on the line. And if Shakur really felt like the same way, if he was so confident, he would do the same thing. It would be no brainer like it was for me.
Allow me to address the elephant in the room. Devin Haney's a good kid. Nothing against him, but he's lying. He's being disingenuous. and he's being disingenuous because the number being floated out there for what Shakur stood to make from the fight was in the neighborhood of around 8 million. That's the number I heard floated around. And if 8 million represents 25%,
8 mil.
that would then have to mean that 24 million would represent the other 75%, the 75% that Devin would have been entitled to as the reigning champion. Now you tell me, who was going to put up $32 million for that fight at this time? Because it wasn't Bob. Bob, in his own words, said there was no substance to Devin Haney's offer. I don't think the money would have been coming from Matchroom because Devin's not under contract with Matchroom, and neither is Shakur Stevenson. Eddie's going to put up $32 million for this fight with these two he don't have under contract. No fucking way. And is this even a $32 million fight? At this time, there's a lot that doesn't make sense about what Devin is saying. Devin is saying that Shakur Stevenson walked away from the fight, but if he did, why does he still have a title shot? And why is your title now vacant? If he's the one that walked away, you would have kept the title and they would have just moved on to the next guy.
In Shakur Stevenson's own words, he didn't walk away from the title shot, and he was going to the WBC to enforce the mandatory. He didn't walk away from it, which makes sense because he still has a shot. He still has a title shot.
In so many words, that's what he told Gilly the Kid, that he didn't walk away, and like I said, that's what makes sense because he has a shot and the World Boxing Council's title is now vacant. What Devin is doing is lying. He's lying to save face, and he's lying because he doesn't want to make it seem like he's avoiding Shakur, and maybe he's not. Maybe it's just that he outgrew lightweight and he knew he couldn't keep making it, so he decided to move up, and that's all he had to say.
He's been doing the rounds on several podcasts, getting his version of the story out there, Angela Yee's, Ariel Helwani's, but it doesn't make sense. If Shakur walked away, he wouldn't still have a title shot now.
I think it's taken a lot of people a lot of time to realize that how could Shakur have been the one that rejected the fight and walked away from it when he still has a shot and the title is now vacant? Seems more likely that Devin moved up, relinquished the belt because he knew he wasn't going to fight Shakur, and I've got nothing against the fight that he's about to have. I like the Prograis fight, though. Looking at this, if Devin is doing anything, he's lying to save face.
He's talking to people that don't know the right questions to ask. That if it's the way you say it is, then why is your title now vacant?
You're saying that he didn't want to fight you? Then how does your title go vacant that you were holding? How does it go vacant in the process of that? Angela Yee, God bless her, because she's hot.
She is.
She's not going to know to ask that question. Ariel Helwani might not either. As well as, who was the financier? Who was supposed to be paying for all of this? Because Devin Haney is a network and promotional free agent. Bob says it wasn't him. Bob says there was no substance to Devin Haney's offer. So who was the offer coming from?
If the offer was real.
These are the questions that need answers in what looks to me to be a sophisticated bluff. A tall tale intended to save face for Devin Haney, who knew he couldn't make 135 anymore. And that's all it is.
Just didn't want to seem like he was running from that guy, that fight.